Welcome back to Property Deconstructed with Pat Panetta and Mark Erichello from Master Advocates. Our special guest, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveying. Mark, we're back again, which is great.
We are, yeah. Thank you, Pat. And yeah, thanks for joining us again, Mike, and staying on for our podcast. But we were talking about the quantity surveying and tax depreciation schedules in the last session. And I know there's a lot of other areas of expertise with quantity surveyors, including you mentioned quantifying building and construction values. I know in the past you've educated us about adequate insurance replacement costs. I think that's important for all property owners as well. Maybe an area that we can expand on those other touch points.
Yeah, well, the insurance one's a real passion project for us because the state of insurance is pretty dire at the moment. And I don't just mean the cost of insurance premiums and insurers avoiding locations because of flood zones. I mean, there's some terrible stories there. But what the Insurance Council of Australia have found is that 83% of property investors were underinsured. Now, that finding came out prior to the COVID pandemic, where we actually saw building costs increase about 20% in 12 or 18 months. So that figure is likely to be a lot more dire or a lot worse than what they predicted at that point in time or what they analysed at that point in time. So, yeah, a lot of people don't realise is that the cost to insure your home is not just a pure rebuild. Like you might see an ad for a new home build and you go, oh, that's way better than mine. I'll just insure it for that and I'll get that. But if your house is to burn down or be completely damaged in a flood or something like that, it doesn't leave a nice, neat site ready for you to rebuild your dream home. And there's also costs involved in the tendering, the construction time frame itself. You might find that what was built there prior is not allowed under current planning. So there's all kinds of escalation costs on top of what you might expect a rebuild cost to be. So in our research, we're finding, the vast majority of people are significantly underinsured, and we want to try and help with that.
No, it's important. No, sorry, yes. Pat, you had a question?
Well, I was going to just before in the last episode, just trying to pick out the best state or territory when it comes to tax laws and those sorts of things. Can you answer that question? If you had your choice, where would you go?
Yeah.
I mean, when I say can you answer it,
I was going to get away with that.
Yeah, is it like two? Is it how long's a piece of string, or is it the sort of question you can sort of answer?
I'll give you some insights on that. I can tell you right now that investors are voting with their feet in terms of where they're purchasing and where they're selling. And the states that have suffered the most from investors exiting the market have been Victoria and Queensland. That's been evidenced by the Property Investment Professionals of Australia's industry sentiment survey. And we also did some analysis during the Queensland land tax. So that was actually legislated. It hadn't come in yet, but it was legislated for about 108 days. And we saw about a 14% drop in investor activity in Queensland because of that tax change. The trouble is that these state governments, I think some of them are running out of money. There's a real cash grab, which you can talk about the Airbnb stuff. But if they're trying to solve rental affordability, putting these arduous conditions on investors is not going to do that. When investors own about 90% of all private housing, they certainly don't need things to be made harder for them. So Victoria and Queensland, a lot of investors are not looking to transact in those states. So personally, I would be looking elsewhere. And there's a lot of investment that's gone into Perth or WA in the last little while. Typically, that tracked at around about 7% of all of the purchases that we see. It's now, we haven't released the official data yet, but it's going to be around about a quarter for the last financial year. So that's been absolutely crazy. But I'd probably be looking into some regional areas in New South Wales for the next one.
Yeah, that's good, and if people you do share your research papers as well on your website, or if people are subscribing to, if they want more information, so through MCG Quantity Surveying, and you can also follow Mike, his seasoned podcast on Geared for Growth, your podcast, and one of the presenters on, is it the Property Trio as well.
The property trio, yes.
Yeah.
It used to have a longer name when Peter Kalizos was in the mix.
Yes.
He's retired. I actually saw him last week. So we're still friends. I didn't kick him off. He retired and I got roped in. And yeah, they changed the name to the property trio because, well, I'm not a professor.
No, and Peter's a professor and from South Australia as well. He's had some great presentations over the years. But and I think, yes, short term there has been a big exodus of and I'm only operating as an agent in Victoria, but there's been a huge exodus or sentiment of fear from investors. I guess long term, if you're fortunate to hold in some of the states that have had that exodus, then where there's population growth and other measures as far as rental yield. If you're fortunate to hold and you can ride the storm, you might benefit in the long term. But there's definitely a lot of pain in the short term.
But if you're riding the storm and you're hanging on there, it's a good point. Maybe there's an opportunity. But if the taxes are so arduous, I mean, what's the use of hanging on?
It's cash flow again, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of interjection from state politicians that are just really ill-equipped, I think, to deal with the housing affordability issue and the rental affordability issue. And we've just seen some of these tinkering around the margin style changes actually exacerbating the problem. And we can have a discussion about whether as a society we want private people to own rental accommodation, but we can't fix it overnight. You can't say that all landlords are greedy and demonize them, and then wait maybe 18 months for a build to rent sector to rescue everybody. It's just kind of not that simple. And investors are actually a big driver for the creation of new housing as well. So there's a lot of parts to play, and I just think politically it's easy to call investors out as the scapegoats and to raise taxes on them, but it is actually making things harder for tenants. And the real human story is that it's going to create an increase in homelessness as well, which I take very, very seriously. And most people that have tenants or are landlords do actually care about such a rapid rise in rents for their tenants. But your average landlord is passing on a hell of a lot less than the increase in costs that they've seen over the last little while with interest rates as well.
It's well said.
Yeah, well said.
Mike.
And we've touched on that sort of in a previous podcast too, or this demonising of renters and really just painting this picture of them which is inaccurate. So why is the government? I mean, it's a no-brainer if you're sort of pushing the private sector out, and as you say, you're trying to build the government housing, and that's sort of way off. So there's this gap in the middle. I mean, we can all see it. Blind Freddie can see it. What's the incentive for this government to basically bungle this up?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just think politically you're never going to get a party to say, landlords need to be incentivized because they're part of the solution. I mean, that is the reality. And I don't think most landlords are saying we need to be incentivized. We just don't want to be disincentivized. I think the Victorian government has struggled with cash flow themselves for quite some time. So, putting this tax on Airbnb is probably one of those things that they can get away with without too much political fallout, but it's not necessarily going to cause the problem. I mean, there are some regional locations and maybe seaside locations where the percentage of Airbnb compared to long-term private rental is way out of whack. But the trouble is with investors, we're making 10, 20, 30-year timeframe decisions. And for all of these changes that come in here and there, it's very hard for people to sort of factor those in. And who wants to invest in an asset today that is going to have a completely different tax situation or a different minimum standard situation tomorrow? That with that lack of uncertainty, it's encouraging people to sell their investment properties and look elsewhere for investment.
Yeah, and controlling a private market or someone's private asset, you don't do that in a private corporation, and it is, an investment property is like your own small business. There's the fear there. Life changes, things happen, people get injured, people change workplace, they change. Over a decade, you could change what's important to you, your value system, family, deaths, disability, to lock yourself in long term. With and being forced what's an attractive investment. I think that with the current market, giving more incentives to long-term property investors that are, and there is an exception that there, in any sector, there's the type of characters or property investors that have been demonised or been poor operators of rental properties or the way they've taken advantage of tenants. That could be a minority. There's genuinely a lot of great investors out there that have a conscience and try not to increase too greatly above market value and take care of their tenants. So, they need to have a broader, more rounded approach.
Yeah. Well, that's good business too, isn't it? You don't just go in and just jack up the rent because you've got somebody in there. They're good tenants. It's your investment. I mean, the private sector, you make decisions in a measured way. It sort of regulates itself. The government's coming in there and fiddling with it all and sort of, mixing it all up. So this Victorian housing statement, which was released not too long ago, is there any sort of bright points in there? What can we take away from that statement, and what's going to happen in the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, look, I can't see things getting much better in the next 5 or 10 years. I mean, we've got a big disparity between the number of people coming into Australia and the housing stock that's available. I mean, we're talking, increase of like 600,000 people in a year, and all of these targets about building 240,000 homes nationally. As far as I understand, we've only ever done that once, but we're basically just throwing out there that we're going to do it 5 years in a row to build our 1.2 million houses at a time where the construction sector is struggling for labour. Construction costs are high. We've had huge amount of liquidations. Yeah. I think these are just kind of press release statements rather than actual real solutions that are going to make a fundamental change.
Yeah, and short term, the real change that is trying to hold on to the private sector owners that are scared and exiting or looking at selling up, instead of retaining those properties in the rental flow or the rental pool.
Because that's frustrating, isn't it? Because you're right, it's press release statements. It's politicians just saying words to win votes because they're thinking short term. But so what do we do? What do we do as homeowners and property owners and civilians of this great state? How do we cope with that lack of leadership?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to support the advocates for landlords wherever you get a chance. So there's obviously the consultation period for the Senate inquiry. You can follow people like Mark, who's on the board of the REIV. You can join Property Investors Council of Australia. You can join things like the Property Investment Professionals of Australia or participate in their surveys. And that at least gives a voice to investors to say, look, you're pushing us too far on this point, or these are actually the things that are important to us. And there are ways that I think that we can have a much healthier relationship between landlords and tenants. And we're a very short-term lease kind of country. There are other countries which work with lot longer term leases that I think adds a greater degree of stability. I mean, there could be incentives around capital gains tax discounts for investors that leave their property, on the market for rent for 5 or 10 years. I mean, why is the CGT exemption happening at 12 months? I mean, that could be moved to 2 years. I mean, the government took away depreciation, certain depreciation deductions in 2017. There's all sorts of things that can be played with. But I just think the rhetoric around investors has got to change. Like Mark made the comparison before about, like small business owners. And I think property investors are kind of small business owners. And we're asking small business owners to have capped upsides on their return. You don't buy a share portfolio and then ASIC tell you what you can actually do with it, or you actually need to give a reason why you want to sell that, or anything like that. It just strikes me as something that's going to disincentivize investors from participating in the market. And the state of affairs at the moment is that the private investors are providing the vast majority of housing. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and respected.
Yeah.
Yep.
Some great insight there, Mike. Thanks so much for sharing as well.
Wonderful.
And I guess, was there any we've touched on a fair bit, but was there any points that you'd like us to elaborate on, or questions as more to?
We've done politics. We may as well do religion, and then I'll get some proper hate mail.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry for jumping on the bandwagon.
No, I am
pretty passionate about it, because I think it is a problem for society when we have such a rapid pace in change of rents. I mean, if you look at, we talked about Peter Kalizos. He produced a study where he tracked rent versus CPI over a 20-year period, and rents have actually increased less than CPI over that time. It's just that rapid pace of change, right? And
yes.
the same is true with interest rates. Interest rates have gone up so quick, it's unprecedented, and that has made it difficult for people to really look after their cash flow, and the cost of living is a problem when things move so quickly. But the pandemic was unprecedented as well. But if we can just make sure that we're providing a stable environment for property investors, and not having all of these debates, state versus state, about rent freezes or extra land tax or Airbnb taxes, it's just going to give people a little bit more certainty.
No, that's great. And I think that, you're right. That stability right now is so important, because it is great that the government's got a plan and an ambitious plan to build more social housing, but that is so far away. So the stability at the moment to sort of cool the jets and let people hang in there is very, very important.
Yeah.
Mike Mortlock, Director of MCG Quantity Surveying. We can also get you on your podcast, Geared for Growth, and Property Trio, propertytrio.com.au. We can find you there. Thanks for your time on Property Deconstructed. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Mark. It's great being on.
Thanks so much, Mike. Good to see you again.
You too.